So both my fiancé and I work at Walmart. We live in a smaller town in Colorado, and right now there's a stage 2 fire ban due to all the fiery crap going on. Meaning that you can't even smoke a cigarette outside without potentially getting a $1,000 fine. It's also worth mentioning that because we live in such a small town, the cops and fire department don't have much else to do than patrol parking lots for public cigarette smoking. Anyway, we both smoke cigarettes and both of our cars have different issues right now, so we've been sharing one car. We can only smoke in our cars on our breaks for now, and since he was working and I wasn't, I visited him on his break so that we could spend a few minutes and a cigarette together. I pulled up to the front of the Walmart and, thinking that he would only take a minute to get to me, put my emergency lights on and waited. After a couple of minutes, a car drives past me but slows down and rolls his window down a bit without saying anything. The guy in the car didn't stop, call out, or even stare at me for very long before parking, but something still creeped me out a little. I called my fiancé and told him to try and hustle a little, mentioning the guy that weirded me out. I understand I had my emergency lights on, but I mean, people do this outside of Walmart for brief amounts of time all day, and who conveniently breaks down in front of a Walmart anyway? While still on the phone with my fiancé, whom I can see walking toward my car from the second entrance at this point, I noticed the guy get out of his car and walk into the Walmart through my rear view. But instead of continuing in, he cuts immediately toward the side door I was parked by, and he comes outside the door and I see him holding what looks like a baseball bat. So I'm freaking out at this point because this guy starts walking toward my car at the same time my fiancé is. Creepy guy gets to the right corner of my hood. I'm standing there with what I can now see as a 2 to 3 foot long sword with a sheath over it, looking past my car like he's looking for someone or pretending to look for someone. This guy also has a huge assortment of knives that are slid into a belt around his waist. I managed only a few glances at his face without trying to be noticed, but I could definitely tell this guy was on drugs or something. Hard to tell which, but I would guess meth-based, based on his eyes and paranoid actions. My fiancé finally approaches the passenger door when Meth Man turns to him, and I'm ready to lay on the horn or something as a distraction, but Meth Man surprisingly does nothing but spontaneously walk past him, and my fiancé safely gets into my car. This guy keeps walking, and I pull away and park further into the parking lot, and my fiancé and I talk a little bit about how scared we both were, not knowing what the hell this guy was doing. A little more terrifying too. My car had been giving me trouble on the way there, and so I test driving it around the lot with my fiancé during his break, only proving the problem more urgent. My fiancé was only on a 15-minute break, so I had him call our police department and report this, just asking them to come and check it out since he had 2 hours left and I was tripping out after Meth Man had seen both of our faces. I was, 1, scared that he might follow my fiancé into Walmart with his sword and try something, or 2, follow me home. I mean, he saw my car, license plate, and both of us drive around a lot during our test drive. After the cops came and tracked my fiancé down in the aisle he was stocking, they got the description and immediately knew who he was. Turns out, they knew exactly where he lived too, in a trailer park across the street from Walmart, and they'd actually been watching out for him because of previous incidences with a security guard at our store. Apparently, the incident went like this too. The security guard stopped him for some reason, and the guy came back a few days later and asked the security guard, "What are you still doing in my town?" To which the security guard replied, "What do you mean? I live here." And the guy said to him, "Not for long." Like, what the hell? I feel it's also important to mention that we live in a small town, a tourist attraction town, and the local population is predominantly rich older people because it's a nice retirement place, but it's really expensive. I mean, you see people strapping rifles to their jeeps, but not meth heads with swords. Anyway, I guess they found him in the parking lot and warned him that if he was seen around Walmart again, let alone carrying anything larger than a 10-inch knife, he was going to be arrested. I haven't seen him since then, and to be honest, I'm glad. Guns are scary, no doubt, but in our town, a lot of people keep them on their waist, so it's not as alarming. However, creepy, drugged-looking man with a 2-foot sword in his hand, that's something else. So I used to sit on the computer at my parents' house and chat on AIM with friends. The main landline for the house sat next to me in that room, and one night I get a call from a weird number, and the voice on the other end asked for me by name. I told him yes, that's me, and he proceeded to tell me that he was at a bar in town that I was not from and saw a for a good time call, and he just gave it a shot to see what kind of person picked up. And I told the guy that I'm 16 and can't even get into bars, nor do I know anyone from that area. He started with, "You sound cute. I bet you're a nice girl, huh?" He told me that he was 18 and he wasn't even supposed to be there, but he had some friends who covered him. I gave the conversation a chance because I thought one of my friends was messing with me or something, and I was hoping to eventually find out who wrote my name on the wall in the bathroom. He asked me questions, and I asked him questions, and before I knew it, we were talking for hours. He was actually a very charming and super interesting guy. I can't remember all that was said because, well, it was about 14 years ago, but I remember telling him that I worked at a movie theater. And no, I didn't have a boyfriend, and yes, I'd love to meet him sometime. He called me a few times after that night and just chatted with me, and the conversation was always flirtatious and even sexual sometimes. Fast forward to a week later, and I'm at work when I see a guy pull up in front of the movie theater and come inside. He's definitely older than 18, and he looks right at me when he comes through the door. And my blood ran cold, and I immediately got this sinking feeling in my stomach that it was the guy that I'd been talking to. I was stuck at the ticket counter, and he walks over to me and calls me by my name. All I could say is, "Hold on a sec," and ran to the other side of the theater where I told a group of co-workers that the guy was here to see me and he was probably a creep. What can I do? He must have overheard because he bolted out the back door and just took off. And for the rest of the day, I felt weird and worried and wasn't sure what to do. I told my mother bits and pieces of what was going on because I knew the situation was sketchy and I didn't help anything. The part that I left out was the fact that I'd been talking to him for a few nights that week and exactly what we were talking about. He calls the house that night and my mother answers the phone and he asks for me and she asks him, "Who is this?" He says, "None of your business, you just need to let me talk to her." My mum absolutely flips out and says, "My daughter is 16 years old. Do you know that? I'm her mother and it's absolutely my business. How old are you?" And he said, "I'm 18 years old, and whatever's going on between me and your daughter is between us." She hounds him for another 20 minutes and tells him that she's calling the police. We do some research on his phone number and find out that he's actually 28, married with 3 kids, and had been in the army. We also found several mugshots with arrests from the town that he lived in, and my mother got sick of the whole thing and took me down to the police station to file a report. I sit down and tell the police officer that the guy found me at work and he was not who he said he was and that I was scared. The officer asked if I had any contact with him other than the initial phone call, and I admitted that I'd been speaking with him for the last few nights and told him where I worked. The officer and my mother both began yelling at me for being so stupid and having poor judgment. The officer said that if anything else happens, to report it, but otherwise, they weren't going to pursue anything. He did call back one more time after that, and I was the one who picked up, and I told him not to call me again and that the conversation was over. He told me before I hung up, though, that he just wanted to meet a nice girl, but I started all this drama. I still have no idea to this day how he got my name and number or why he wanted a 16-year-old, other than the fact that he was a creep bastard preying on young girls, but when I saw those mugshots, I knew this guy was no good. Now, the neighborhood I live in is far from sketchy, and I have to say that the neighbors have been amazing. Well, all except for one dude. This one guy that used to live next door to us was just a complete asshole, and also a convicted sex offender, and his most recent arrest made me think of when we first met. This guy always kept his big dogs barking outside, so my mum went next door to confront him one day. Unlike myself, my mum is pretty aggressive and confrontational, and while I try to avoid conflict as much as possible, she will just go for it. But I'll have you know that I'm extremely protective of my family, and I can sense whether a person is good or bad just by reading their body language. This ability has yet to fail me, so I trust it too. So, when my mum went to confront him about his dogs, he didn't answer the door, but a couple of nights later, I was home alone with my little brother and my mum was at work. The security system we have alerted my phone of a visitor. Because the man I saw in the picture wasn't someone I recognized, I ignored it and nothing happened. The next night, the guy comes round again, and this time, my mum answers the door. I sat just outside of view upstairs, listening to the whole conversation from the living room couch. The man was a complete arsehole to my mum, saying if she worked very hard or at all, she wouldn't be home to hear the dogs bark, and she just needed to get a life and stop being lazy. Now, my mum, I can vouch for her, works really, really hard. She's a single parent to me, a girl with cystic fibrosis, and she's also a real estate agent who managed about 80 houses at that time. And how dare he say that, right? At this point, I got pretty mad and went to the top of the stairs to get a look at this guy, who was calling my anything but lazy mother such names. And it was the same fat ass who I saw on the camera the night before. He didn't see me, but he saw my little brother, who had come up from the basement to see what was going on. And the guy's tone changed pretty drastically when he saw my 7-year-old brother. He suddenly became uncomfortably nice. My mum got tired of this guy's painfully creepy sing-song voice and just shut the door in his face, and the man finally left. About a week goes by, and the dogs haven't been hurt at all, and the same dude that had called my mum lazy the previous week came by with a plate full of fresh chocolate chip cookies for us and apologized far too many times for what he did. I wasn't home when he brought the cookies over, but my mum and little brother said that they tasted good and offered me some, but I don't eat food created by strangers, especially creepy strangers that call my mum lazy. I eventually just threw the rest of the cookies away because, honestly, I didn't trust this guy one bit. Over the course of about another 2 months, this guy comes over regularly, inviting us to have barbecues and fires in his backyard fire pit, and remains super friendly. He lived in a house with a bunch of roommates, all of which warned my mum about the man's criminal record and creep factor. I also told my mum to just avoid him and to not let my brother alone outside with him around, and to absolutely never go to one of his little barbecues, and she listened. Suddenly, though, I came home from a weekend with my dad. I'm home for about a month, and the guy was just up and gone. His dogs were never outside, and he never came to the door, and the roommates were silent about him too. I thought that this was really weird, considering his piece of shit car was still parked outside in front of the house too, but then I found out why. It turns out the guy was living off government handouts for those last few months that he was harassing us, and the guy was absolutely a registered sex offender and frequently got DUIs. The fat ass was arrested and charged with yet another DUI in a friend's car, and when they did so, the cops searched his phone. I guess they had other reasons to do this, but whatever, and they found lots, and I mean lots, of child porn on it. They also found that shit on his laptop back at his house. The guy was a complete pedo, who seemed to be trying to get close to me, or more realistically, my little brother. Just for reference, he stood about eye level to me, and he was short, fat, neckbeard looking guy who I could probably take on in a fight since I'm highly trained in martial arts. Taekwondo, Krav Maga, other military style stuff too. And I think he was trying to lure us into things, just thinking about it. When I heard that my suspicions were confirmed, and my mum had another reason to be proud of her guard dog daughter, she brought me to a really nice sushi restaurant, and I even found a Mountain Dew, my favourite soda. My mum thinks it's totally nasty though, in the fridge next to a crock pot of chicken soup, waiting for me. I'm just glad that everything turned out the way that they did, and that the dude wasn't given much of a chance to hurt us. Last I heard, he was given a 40-year prison sentence for all the sickening stuff that he was into, and for someone as grossly fat and probably sick as he, that's definitely a life sentence. I'm a 27-year-old female, and at the time this occurred, I was a senior in high school, angsty and steadily into partying. For this story, I'm going to hide her identity, but let's call her Kay. Kay almost cost me my life, and honestly, I never want to see her again. A little backstory on Kay first. She had grown up privileged, given anything she ever wanted. Her parents adopted her 5 cousins, and this is when she started to rebel. Her parents, well off, started to pay less attention to her, so Kay had all the freedom in the world she wanted. At the time this incident occurred, Kay was 18 and I had just turned 18 as well. We were headed to a kickback at these guys' house. Nothing more than a little bit of weed was expected. Now, I had my share in smoking weed and popping pills here and there. I had just tried ecstasy the summer prior. However, I was planning on staying sober. So she picked me up and we stopped to buy some cigarettes at a gas station. I bought a fountain drink, one with the straw and everything, and this is crucial for later in the story. We arrive at the apartment and everyone is smoking, including Kay, but I declined. She would always say shit about how she never wanted to be high alone, complained about how I never got as high as her, so I obliged and cleared the bong off her hit, not even taking a full hit, mind you. She asked for a drink of my soda and I handed it to her. She had it for a good minute too. I had my head turned, talking to someone at the kickback, when I looked back at Kay and she was messing with my straw. I didn't think much of it, and she handed it back to me, and within about 30 minutes or so, I started to feel really intensely high, to the point that I needed to escape from the group. I go out front to smoke a cigarette, only to find that I couldn't even stand up, so I laid on the front porch. And then, all of these dark thoughts flashed through my mind. I felt so sick, like my stomach was being torn open, that I couldn't stand up. I had to crawl to the bushes to throw up, and I thought to myself, all of this off of clearing a bong? So, I laid back on the porch. The apartment was located on a busy street in the city I live in, and I also thought about running into traffic because, honestly, I felt like I was dying. So, I gave myself 2 options. I could run into the traffic, have a car hit me and end this horrible pain that I was in, or I could get some help, maybe flag someone down. My mind was obviously not in the right state, and I knew nobody at the kickback would take me seriously, and I knew that something was really wrong. I thought about calling my mum. I must have dialed her number and hung up like 5 different times, and finally, I called and told her what had happened, and that I didn't know why I was so high. Nobody else was feeling the way that I felt, and what seemed like an eternity later, Kay came outside looking for me. As I'm puking my guts out into the bushes, she asks me if I want to go to get some food. I asked her if she was serious, and she laughed as I puked. What I didn't know is that my mother had called my older brother to pick me up, since he lived close to where I was. And he showed up with a machete, ran inside and threatened people because he didn't know who gave me what. It wasn't until I got home that my brother took one look at my eyes and noticed how dilated my pupils were, so they rushed me into the ER after more puking, of course. My memory there is a bit fuzzy, but I just remember asking my sister-in-law if I was going to die and telling her that I was scared. They ended up sedating me due to the fact that I was yelling and threatening the nurses, totally out of character for me, mind you. They did a tox screen, a drug test, and found MDMA, the drug found in ecstasy along with other drugs in my system. I'm assuming that the other drugs were the ones used to make up the ecstasy. Now, this is all frightening and everything. However, what I found out a few days later shocked me to my core. Kay had been to a house party the next night, and somebody there had said that she was passing out free ecstasy to 4 different people. Of those 4 people, 3 had grand mal seizures and had to be taken to the ER by ambulance. I'm assuming that whatever ecstasy she used, it was a really bad batch. And remember when she asked to have a drink of my soda? I assume that this is when she dropped the pill inside and it dissolved. She probably crushed it beforehand or something. I have no clue, but at this time in my life, I hadn't done drugs for quite a while, especially not ecstasy. Kay also went on to tell people that I was the one that slipped her the drug and she had to go to hospital too. She is a pathological liar and has actually had to go to therapy for a long time for mental disorders and stuff. All of this happened because she just wanted me to be high like her. It's crazy to think that that night I could have committed suicide because I just wasn't in my right mind. It still affects me to this day, and I know it sounds cliche, but I have a hard time trusting people with this experience, among other things. I also don't like sharing drinks with friends, obviously, and I get scared when I go out to a bar or a club, fearing for the worst. I mean, if my own friend has done this to me, what's stopping a complete stranger? And so, I always guard my drink now, no matter what. So my partner and I, we decided to spend our 4th of July at this rich people mall in the downtown area of our city. It has actual restaurants in the food court, a great movie theatre, and it's easy to get home from there. But when we get there and eat, the place is packed. But by the time that we get to hit the movie, everyone is starting to clear out so they can get to their firework destinations. We watch the movie and maybe 5 other people are in the theatre with us. By the time that we get out and my partner uses the bathroom in the theatre, the place is deserted, as it's just past 9 o'clock on July 4th. Everyone is out watching fireworks, in other words. So we get maybe 10 feet out of the theatre and I suddenly have to use the bathroom now too. Except we left the theatre, so they won't let us back in. Every store is closed early because of the holiday, so the place is abandoned and my only option is to use the mall bathroom. Not the worst thing in the world, but it was just inconvenient. The first thing my partner and I notice as we approach the bathroom is a bunch of security guards just running around. Literally running around like they have no idea what to do, straight up freaking out. I knew that this was a red flag, a huge one in fact, but now I really need to use the bathroom and figure that if it's something incredibly bad, they'll tell us to leave, right? They wouldn't just knowingly let me walk over there and use the bathroom, knowing about danger, right? So we get closer and we hear banging and screaming coming from one of the bathrooms. But the bathrooms sit next to one another and share a wall, so I have to walk by the security guards and this bathroom to get to my bathroom, which is just the thickness of this wall away. My partner and I figure that it must just be a junkie freaking out in the bathroom, and the security guards at a rich mall have never really handled things like this and they don't know what to do. We think this because they see us approach and see me walk past them and say absolutely nothing. And again, I think to myself, if it was serious, they would speak up, right? And so I go into the bathroom and just my luck, every stall is out of toilet paper. So I have to spend all of this extra time in there, checking every stall for toilet paper, walking over to get a hand towel and walking back to the stall and then washing my hands and leaving. By the time I check out, I see all but one security guard literally running away. The guard who stayed has a 1,000-yard stare and the freakout is still going on in the bathroom. My partner has no idea what's going on, so we just grabbed an elevator to the main floor and walked outside to call a lift. We get outside and there are cop cars everywhere. Lights flashing, pulled up in front of the doors. The cops are hopping out and the security guards who ran away are flocking to them. A large and in-charge-looking female cop looks at one of the security guards as they're walking towards us and says, "We got reports of an IED." The security guard replies, "Yeah, in the upstairs bathroom, and they're freaking out." Then the door closed behind them and we couldn't hear anymore. They never stopped being in motion from the time they opened the cop car door to when they went inside, so it was clear that this was really serious. My partner and I looked at each other and just tried to shrug it off. It's probably nothing. I mean, it was probably just some drug addict that got their hands on some sparklers or a cherry bomb. We call the lift and a few minutes later they show up. Traffic is a bit heavy at that intersection, so we end up being stuck outside the mall for a minute because we're right at the light. The lift driver asks what all the police presence is about, and we're explaining what happened. We see the doors open and the police pushing a guy in a hoodie in front of them who was struggling under the weight of carrying an IED. And let me tell you, this was no cherry bomb. I mean, it was about the size of a tote and held what had to have been between 18 to 24 huge tubes. Fireworks, maybe? It had wires and duct tape, and everything looked like it had been connected to either a larger central wire or a giant central fuse. In other words, I think it may have been a bomb. And then the light changed and we just drove away. I have no idea how he got it into that bathroom in the first place. I mean, he could barely carry it. I have no idea if him freaking out was what kept him from setting it off, or if he was freaking out because he tried to set it off and it didn't work. I also don't know why they didn't call someone other than the regular police to deal with this, but my best guess would be that maybe they were all busy, since it's a pyrotechnic-based holiday anyway. My partner and I were pretty freaked out, to say the least, and the loud bangs that we heard for the next 6 hours, thanks to our neighbours, didn't help. I have looked around, but nothing about this has shown up in the news or the crime blotters or anything, which makes me wonder if it got moved to a higher up branch or something, since it involved explosives in a public place, or if this is so commonplace on July 4th that it just wasn't considered newsworthy. Either way, I don't know what he was doing in that bathroom with all those explosives, but boy, am I glad that it didn't go off while I was taking a dump.